Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for our webinar today. Today we'll be talking about the Q1 state of cybersecurity in the mortgage industry. Our presenters that you see here are Nathan Lee and Michael Nouguier. Michael is our Chief Information Security Officer and Director of our Cybersecurity Services practice, and Nathan is our partner in charge of advisory. Richey, if you are not familiar with us, was founded over 35 years ago to focus exclusively on the needs of the mortgage banking industry. With that, we have gotten to understand the market and our clients in ways that fuel everything that we do around here. So we've started our advisory services to really fulfill that need for all of our clients and give you all what you need most. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan Lee.
Thank you, Gabby, and thanks everybody for joining today. Welcome. It's always good to spend a few minutes with you wherever you are. Michael and I are both in Colorado, but wherever you're joining us from, hope it's beautiful and you're enjoying spring and things are warming up. Things are definitely getting a little bit better in the mortgage industry, which is good, but still not as great as everybody would like, I know. So we appreciate you carving some time out from your schedules. I know it's busy and you have a lot going on. Yeah, I'm pleased to be joined by Michael Nouguier today, and Michael and his team are a very accomplished, experienced group of cybersecurity professionals and have great insights. And I think you'll appreciate some of the just current recent information that Michael will share today. And we'll do it as a little bit of a discussion here. I'll be asking Michael some questions throughout. We'll have a little bit of a discussion, so you guys will be observers in that discussion. So we'll try that format here today. I also just want to let you know, if you do have questions throughout, feel free to drop them into the chat function in the GoToMeeting app, and we will monitor those throughout and answer as many of them as we can. So with that, I'll hand things over to Michael, let him maybe do a real quick introduction of himself, and then he can dive in and we'll get going.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nathan. As Nathan said, my name is Michael Nouguier. Hard last name to say. Nouguier, like you're giving a kid a noogie, yay, like you're excited about it. I have been in cybersecurity and in information technology now for a little over 20 years, focused mostly on cybersecurity in my career, going back to working in state government and then building out from there to multiple other industries, and with a heavy focus in the financial services industry from a cybersecurity perspective. So lots of experience in that realm. And I'll just kick it off here, going next to, we always like to define what cybersecurity is and what we think it is here at Richey May. And so, right, we want to protect. Cybersecurity is all about protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks, using people, processes, and technologies to ensure what we call the CIA triad: the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of data. Right, and since financial services deals with a lot of important data, personally identifiable data, financial information, proprietary information, it is one of the most targeted industries out there. And so our goal in working in cybersecurity is to use those three core areas, people, technology, and processes, to protect confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. And the things that can impact that, we're going to talk about moving on next, as we talk about the statistics that happened from 2022 through Q1 of 2023. And so that's not a typo on this slide, right? We have all the data from 2022 aggregated, and we've done a lot of research on that. And so we'll be referencing some of that as we move forward here in some breach statistics. And I went ahead on these, are on this left image here, and highlighted the financial industry because what you'll see here is that they're in no particular order. But the most compelling data that you'll see here is the total number of breaches impacting a single industry. Financial services was the highest impacted at 690 total breaches. And so you'll see that moving throughout. The next two highest were professional services and then unknown, and so more that could contribute to financial services. So just a little shy of 2 breaches per day in the financial services industry, with a total of 2,500 total cyber incidents, like reported incidents impacting financial services in the last year. And then the right side is a more compelling graph to just state and show the severity of cyber attacks across the globe, where you'll see a whole bunch of countries listed there in that top image, pointing out just total number of incidents reported across different countries, and then the bottom image showing all of the sum of all of the above nations total incidents reported, and then the United Kingdom and the United States in the last year total number of reported incidents. And so what you'll see there is the United States is heavily targeted and heavily attacked when it comes to a cybersecurity perspective. And so some compelling information there to drive what we saw, and that's just right 2022. This information is all delivered from the Verizon data breach report that they deliver annually, and so this is a subset of data that they manage, and what they're bringing out here is showing just shy of 500,000 attacks across all industries in the United States last year.
And it's probably an obvious comment here, comment more than a question, but clearly finance is targeted because financial services entities hold a significant amount of sensitive private information for their customers. And as all of you on this call know, that includes mortgage companies. You have a tremendous amount of information on your borrowers, literally everything, everything that anybody could want to know about them, you have it. Social security number, date of birth, tax returns, bank statement information, and so on and so forth. And so it's a target-rich environment for them to go and focus on within financial services. So
heavily, right? Those that manage the money and manage the information are the ones that are getting attacked, right? Because that is where you see the highest gain. And we have some statistics coming up later that we'll talk about what types of attacks we're seeing in financial services versus other industries. But right, the two largest reasons are because you have the money and you have the personal information, and so and then outside of that, you're heavily regulated from a lot of different perspectives. State, federal regulations really lead to a greater financial impact to financial services industries. So we'll move on to the next slide here and look at just the most common attacks over time in the financial services industries. And so a really cool looking graph here, it's called a spaghetti graph, and it tries to consolidate everything into just one area that it most likely aligns with. And so what you'll see on here is the 3 most common attacks within the financial services industry are against web applications, system intrusion, and error misconfiguration. And what you'll notice most compelling out of this graph is that over the last year, so in 2020, you'll see system intrusion dramatically increase over time, and that's because in 2020 a lot of things needed to happen to enable organizations to work with state, city, and national lockdowns and travel bans within organizations, and so that opened up the need for public-facing intrusions to exist. And so what you'll see is that increases a slight decrease in web application and misconfigurations, because as we started seeing the system intrusions rise, right, organizations started saying, well, we need to do better on securing our public infrastructure, public-facing infrastructure. And so those were the top 3 most common attacks, and
So
we'll touch.
Michael, what would be included in system intrusion? Are there some subcategories there that would make up that system intrusion bucket?
Yeah. So that would be like vulnerability exploitation. So vulnerabilities exist as bugs or errors in code as well. And so, right, the reason that we have security patching, updating of our systems and operating systems, third-party softwares, those would be vulnerabilities that are getting patched at those time. And so system intrusion, what leads to that system intrusion is the exploitation of a software vulnerability on something, on whether it's an operating system that exists publicly or even internally inside your environment, or a software or application that's publicly exposed as well. Some compelling data around that. 2022 was again a banner year from a vulnerability, a CVE perspective, and so vulnerabilities are all tagged. All publicly known vulnerabilities are all managed through the National Vulnerability Database. And 2022 saw a large increase in CVEs, which CVE stands for Common Vulnerability and Enumeration. And so each vulnerability released comes with a number and is documented. And we saw more in 2022 than we have in 2023. We're noticing year over year in the first quarter higher numbers of vulnerabilities being released, and that can be in part to better recognition of vulnerabilities, and increased or advances in software detection for vulnerabilities. But what we would expect to see is if we were doing software development correctly and focusing on security more, or earlier in that process, we would see a decrease in those hopefully over time. But we're also seeing more and more software get released quicker, faster, better, especially with the, with the release of ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence large language models coming out to assist in the development of software. So, and we'll be talking a little bit more about artificial intelligence later in this presentation as well. We do see a slight decline, going back to this graph, in social engineering, but for the most part, public exposures are leading to breaches, and those public exposures can be anything that's public facing. And so when we talk about web applications, right, that's in the mortgage industry, that's our servicing portals, that's any portal that has a login from the internet is really considered a web application. And so securing those and understanding where vulnerabilities exist within those, doing the proactive measures to remediate against those is really going to lower that graph moving forward. And it looks like on this, over time, we're already making strides in decreasing the risk there, or the likelihood there.
Mm-hmm.
We'll jump into a more focused view of the quarter in Q1. And so in the financial services arena or industry, financial services was the number 4 or the 4th most targeted in March, January, and February, making up a total of 10% of all of the attacks. Right, there is some fluctuation in that, as we see above. Right, there's multiple industries, and so what could exist in that, in the red here, could be more financial services, but true to form, just single financial services industries, you're seeing about 9 to 10% of all attacks happening in Q1. on the data that we were able to correlate against here. What's compelling is that, yeah, as you'll see here, financial services, and it might be too small, financial services attacks were all cybercrime related. And so to differentiate, right, there are four different areas on here that they're discussing when it comes to those types of attacks. Cybercrime being red, cyber espionage, hacktivism, and then cyber warfare. So cybercrime is related specifically to hacking, identity theft, fraud, distribution of malware, viruses, social engineering. Right? Espionage would be, again, related to spying, right? Trying to steal intellectual property, typically happening towards research organizations, federal governments, state and national governments as well. Hacktivism being an impacting cyber attack towards organizations to cause downtime in the vein of some sort of activist cause. And then cyber warfare would be directly related to some sort of war-related campaign. So think Russia, Ukraine, right? There have been outside of the militaristic actions that are happening there. Russia and Ukraine have been performing cyber attacks against each other, trying to impact utilities, impact financial services in those locales as well. So what's interesting about this is that in the financial services industry, you will see that every attack that we were able to correlate against in this was related specifically to cybercrime. So again, trying to impact the organization, steal data, ransom data, socially engineer people to gain a greater foothold, things like that.
Michael, you mentioned hacktivism, and while this wouldn't be hacktivism per se, but is somewhat similar and relevant in the mortgage industry because there is the opportunity and sometimes some motivation for individuals that are being laid off from a company to take some steps to be a bad actor from the inside on their way out. And so there is some exposure anytime a company is reducing the workforce and potentially has some employees that are dissatisfied as a result. And so could you talk to that a little bit? Again, might not be hacktivism per se, but definitely could be potentially at risk of some insider threat with some motivated individuals.
Yeah, so insider threat's the key there, right? Is that during organizational fluctuation when it comes to the labor workforce, right? You do get disgruntled employees that can cause insider threats. I think what you're trying to lead towards there is that, and we've seen stories of this crop up. Most significantly was a story around Tesla where an internal employee was reached out to by a hacktivist organization, and they wanted the employee to plug in a USB port or USB into his computer and then walk away after quitting, right? Fortunately, that employee did the right thing and turned in everything, things along those lines. But right, there are, right, from a hacktivism perspective, it can lead to insider threat risk within an organization. And so, right, talking about what the proper, right, the policy is only one area to really protect against that, process and procedure, right, but there's technology to help protect against that as well. And so making sure organizations are focusing on how to protect not just against the external threats, but right, every employee can pose some form of internal threat, which is really where the inception of zero trust architecture from a cybersecurity perspective has really entered the industry over the last 5 or 6 years as a prominent way to protect against this.
Yeah.
So I think from here we'll jump into ransomware being really one of the things that keeps not just security professionals up at night, but probably business owners, CFOs, CIOs, CEOs, right? This is not something that that is ever should ever be taken lightly, and it's one of those things that, at least in my in my career, has kept me up at night. Something that I worry about. For those that don't know what ransomware is, it's basically just digital extortion, right? Encrypting files, encrypting information and data, and then demanding payment for that in return for restoration. Some concepts that have really emerged out of that is that there's double and triple extortion when it comes to ransomware, and so, right, the whole definition of cybersecurity that we gave earlier is protecting data, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of it. And ransomware really breaks the chain on all three of those, right? Because the availability is impacted when it's encrypted. Nobody can access that information, and right, so it takes longer to get the information that you need, right? And if you think to the medical industry, if patient records are encrypted, that could be really, really severe to an organization or to a hospital that is providing emergency services to somebody and can't access those. Right? In the financial services industry, if you can't access critical services that you need in order to, let's take the mortgage industry, move forward with any portion of the loan origination process, right? All your competitors will be reached out to in that process, right? And you'll lose potential clients in that aspect. But also the information that is taken, right, from not just an availability perspective, but also an integrity and confidentiality perspective. If the data that you're bringing in as a mortgage bank is PII, Social Security numbers, bank account information, investment information, tax returns, all of that is PII and is regulated across every state and the federal government and other countries, right? With Europe having GDPR, right? And the fines associated with losing that data or compromising that data, and the confidentiality behind it can be astronomical. And so ransomware impacts the integrity of or the confidentiality of that data as well, and the integrity of that data. When they are restoring data, if you pay the ransom, right, you have to validate that data has not been impacted. And so in the most recent, it wasn't necessarily ransomware, but in the most recent data leak that we've all seen from the federal government, where the Pentagon had leaked some documents, right? The documents were changed, and so the integrity of that, the availability of that information, and the confidentiality of that information was all impacted as well. So when talking about ransomware, this is over time. And the first ransomware I actually saw personally was back in, I think, 2013, 2014. The ransom was $500. It was kind of like more of an inconvenience than anything else. We just wiped the computer and started over, right? But I have been a part of ransomwares over the last decade, some of which have been hundreds and thousands to even millions of dollars. And so when you see those come across and just the progression that ransomware has taken over time, right, to impacting a single person's files to crippling an organization, it really, right, while we've only seen a 13% increase year over year in ransomware, right, in the last year we saw a 25% increase in that. And it's not just an increase in the amount that we're seeing it, we're seeing an increase in the impact that it's having to organizations as well.
Yeah, Michael, on the ransomware topic, because like you, this is something that keeps me up at night as a business owner, and you know, with a firm that's been around for many years and serves many companies and individuals around the country. I mean, ransomware can be highly impactful for us and for anybody. And so this is something that keeps me up. And so I just want to pause here for a sec, maybe ask you a couple questions. There's actually, you know, some on this call might be aware, may or may not be, but over the last almost couple weeks now, there's been a well-known critical service provider to mortgage companies that has been down for over a week and a half, and it's impacted a lot of our clients, and they've had to scramble as a result. So not only is there the ransomware considerations that need to be made for ourselves as companies that are in the business of serving clients, but we also have to think about that third-party ransomware risk and how to address those risks in policies that are written and that we're prepared to execute in the event that something happens. And so, I want to just talk about each of those maybe separately here and say, on the first, what are some things that companies should be doing now to prepare for the potential for a ransomware event, or maybe said another way, what can companies do now to prevent it? And then if it does happen, well, what do companies need to be, doing to be able to recover quickly and not let it impact the organization in a more significant way than it already, will, obviously.
Right. And that's perfect way to phrase it, because prevention is one portion of it, right? But you have to bring up the old adage, right? Well, I call it old. I've been in the industry for a while, right? You have to be right in preventing ransomware every time. I'll kind of change the quote, but an attacker only has to be right once in order to impact your organization. So, right, prevention should be a focus, but understanding that being right every time is really hard to do. And so also creating resilience behind or in your network, in your organization for ransomware. So in preventing it, right, there's a handful of things that are required in the financial services industry from regulation. One of those being, right, endpoint detection and response that really couples antivirus into that. And so there are endpoint detection and response is really just a endpoint logging solution that identifies what we would say forensically interesting information that's happening on an endpoint and is able to act upon that. So it goes beyond an antivirus. Antiviruses are focused on good and bad files. And so if a ransomware is dropped on a computer, the antivirus should be able to catch that. Antiviruses aren't perfect. Some have high efficacy, but there are still ways to circumvent those. And so the endpoint detection and response is identifying behaviors and characteristics on a machine that are happening on a device and is able to block those. And so ransomware just doesn't magically appear on a device. It's either downloaded from an email or a threat actor is already in an environment and is trying to perform other aspects in order to get ransomware in there. And so an EDR, or an endpoint detection and response technology, really identifies those solutions. And so the question that typically comes out of that is that produces a lot of data, Michael. How do we manage that? And so there are, and Richey may include it in this, technologies out there that provide managed solutions to this, so that rather than saying, all right, and I think the statistics are, 50 billion alerts a year, right? Most of those need to get weeded out to the most forensically interesting ones, and you'll typically see a 1 billion to 100 ratio in that. And so those 100 then need to be reviewed for whether or not they're false positives or true positives. And then you can take 50 billion and really weed it out with a managed detect and response solution down to less than 100 in a year forensically interesting artifacts that can be prevented in your organization that require some form of response to that. So EDRs are a huge portion to what an organization in the financial services and mortgage industry need, so that you can identify not just the files that are existing on a computer, but also the behaviors that are taking place on computers. And so from a prevention perspective, there's that. More recently than not in the cybersecurity industry, a lot of new organizations are cropping up. And so there are anti-ransomware specific solutions. And these are different than antiviruses because they're only focused on the particular DNA of ransomware. So understanding that malware in general can cause a lot of different impacts on a computer, where ransomware is specifically encrypting files. And so a lot of the anti-ransomware technologies these days are when something is encrypted, a key is created. That key is like a password to decrypt the file. And so if it is able to circumvent the anti-ransomware is still maintaining all the encryption keys that are happening. And so if you are impacted, you have a route to decrypt your own data. And so anti-ransomware solutions, happy to talk about those. If anybody's interested after a call, after this webinar, but those are also cropping up and have high efficacy and high protection in the ransomware area. And so from a protection or from a prevention perspective, those would be the two biggest ways to do that, right? Also, with prevention, you want to make sure that your organization is trained in identifying it, similar to phishing emails, right? And that's a huge entry point, right? 98% of attacks start with the human element. And so making sure the organization is trained in cybersecurity and a culture of cybersecurity really exists in an organization, so that everybody in the organization can lend towards that identification and prevention. And then aside from that, the resilience is really making sure that you have the capabilities to recover from ransomware, which is great backups, right? Backups have some just general rules around that, right? You should be performing backups, and those backups should follow the 3-2-1 methodology, which is you should be pulling 3 backups in 2 different locations, and one of them should not, and it should exist on multiple types of media, and one should be stored at a different location than where you are, because backups shouldn't just be about ransomware, but more business continuity and just general disaster recovery, which we have some slides coming up here. And so backups really build that resiliency. It's also one of the number one cost-saving techniques that you can use when searching for cybersecurity insurance, is making sure that you have a robust business continuity and disaster recovery plan, including backups. As you can imagine, ransomware is probably the number one attack that is used to claim against cyber insurance. And so actuaries and underwriters and insurers are looking at that and saying it'd be a lot easier to insure somebody if they had capability to recover and be resilient, and we'll still be able to assist them from a financial loss perspective in the event of a ransomware. I think a compelling story around this is the JBS ransomware. It happened in 2021. JBS is a meatpacking plant, so not the same industry, but still very, very much related to ransomware. They were ransomware. They got ransomware in their organization, and the ransom was $11 million. They went to pull from backups and ended up paying the ransomware regardless, because their backups had not been tested organization-wide, and the amount of time to restore those backups was measured in years rather than hours, days, months. And so business continuity and disaster recovery from a planning perspective would dictate that you have to test your business continuity and disaster recovery plans. You have to test your backup, when it's getting pulled and how long it takes to restore from backup, because those two things can really bite you in the event of an incident. So, and Nathan, I'll stop for a question from you.
Yeah, no, and on that point, the business continuity disaster recovery plan is an often overlooked, maybe not overlooked, but neglected area of the business. And oftentimes, we find it hasn't been written. If it is written, it's kind of an off-the-shelf policy hasn't really been tailored to the organization, hasn't been updated to reflect kind of the current environment and facts. And so, let's just be honest. I mean, a lot of people don't get into information technology or information systems, go into IT profession because they want to draft policies. And so it's something that often gets neglected. And so we've actually done a fair amount of work in this area. I mean, maybe a shameless plug here a little bit. We've done a fair amount of BCDR work for clients, and if that's something we can help with, because again, it doesn't often bubble up to the top of the to-do list, just let us know. But that is a critical component for making sure that in the event of ransomware, you can recover quickly, get back up and running without a really significant impact on the organization, which we still see obviously all too often out there with some companies, including the one that's been going on over the last couple of weeks I mentioned.
Yep. And what I will say on that is that having a business continuity plan and testing it is really important. And so for prevention and for resilience, testing, whether it's tabletop exercises to test your business continuity plans or even a penetration test to understand the weaknesses that exist inside your organization so that you can remediate against those are also both a preventative and a resilience measure. So would recommend both of those too.
No.
We'll move on to phishing here, just to show what we're seeing here, and this comes again from the Verizon Data Breach Report for 2022. And if you're not sure what phishing is and social engineering is, it's basically deceptive emails, phone calls, text messages, seeking personal and sensitive information. So trying to trick you into clicking on a link and entering in your credentials, or having you download a malicious invoice or pay a falsified invoice or fraudulent invoice. And so in 2022, we saw 82% of all breaches involved the human element. And so that's really compelling, right? Most people think of a hacker in a basement with a hoodie on, just typing on several different keyboards, where in reality, it's somebody trying to take advantage of another person in order to gain a greater foothold within an organization. Phishing is the most common type of cyber attack or cybercrime, right? The FBI, I think last year alone, saw $80 billion nationwide that traversed hands due to phishing attacks. So a lot of money going back and forth there. You can see why it's also very easy, right? There's not a huge technical component to it. With the introduction of, again, artificial intelligence chatbots like ChatGPT and others, right? It makes it a lot easier to craft those emails. And I know that there are security measures in ChatGPT to prevent against those. However, ChatGPT in and of itself and other artificial intelligence large language models aren't secure, and there are ways to circumvent that relatively easily. What can you do from a? Oh,
Michael, giving them, just to clarify, essentially giving a bad actor the ability to craft emails that aren't riddled with the same like grammatical spelling issues that we've all become accustomed to over the years, where we could say, yeah, that clearly is not, was not written by somebody that maybe speaks English natively, or so it raises some red flags. Whereas now, using one of those large language models, they could craft emails that would pass that sniff test, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think even more so from an industry perspective, right? So as an attacker, I wouldn't need to know anything about the mortgage industry, because something like a ChatGPT I could say, hey, create me an email to have somebody change their password, log in and change their password to a mortgage technology, right? And then I can, from there, it'll say, all right, you need to log into, this is the most common LOS, and right, and that's what ChatGPT does, is it takes away the barrier for understanding industry specific information as well. And right, you can also use AI related technologies to build websites in a couple of seconds rather than taking days to do that. And so ChatGPT has integrated into a lot of website development tools, and all you have to do is use natural language to say, build me a web login that looks like Microsoft, and it'll do something like that for you. So it has taken away also the barrier that would require you to understand how to build a website at this point. So things that you can do to help protect against phishing is using, right, what I'll say is educate, train, learn, right? Use automated security awareness tools like KnowBe4. Microsoft as well has some of its own integrations inside of itself, and there are a handful of others. To provide that security awareness training, I like to take a step above automated training, because learning management systems are great for training the masses, but it doesn't really help solve the problem of answering people's questions when it comes to security. And so I always like to try and include a dialogue, which is why we hold webinars where people can chat across questions if they have any, so that we can help answer those. But doing a more focused training, maybe with business units, to understand the specifics that somebody in, say, the loan origination department would need to know versus like internal accounts payable, right? Because there's going to be some nuances that are specific to the mortgage industry. For instance, loan officers are highly targeted in the mortgage industry, where that doesn't exist in other industries. Most other industries, they target the C-level executives, which we would call whale fishing, but the mortgage industry is specific for their loan officers being targeted from a phishing perspective. So with tools and social networks out there like LinkedIn, it's very easy for me to find LOs. And right, if it's easy for me too, it's easy for the bad actors too as well. And so that's why education and training come in handy in focusing that to different business units as well. Validating the effectiveness of your training as well, sending out phishing emails, having a third party do some more advanced tests to identify where some of those gaps can exist, not just from an email or text message or voice perspective, but also in policies and procedures that you have inside your organization. I did include a link here for some free tools that exist out there, phishing.org, and then KnowBe4 also offers a handful of free security tools as well, to just look through and assist your organization there.
And I think it's important to note here too, Michael, maybe you could talk about this a little bit. It'll relate to the topic that you're getting into next here, which is a current trend that the FBI has alerted the public to. And something like that is really important to make sure it's addressed with a training program, so that the training program doesn't feel like that kind of just stale, repetitive training program, but is instead incorporating, current trends that are real right now and have the potential for impacting an organization that a lot of people, frankly, just might not even be aware of. Because if they don't see an FBI alert, if they don't even understand the contents of the FBI alert and what they're telling people to do or not do, it can be really easily missed. So something like this incorporated into a training program can be really important for a company.
Exactly, and I think what you're referencing is juice jacking, which I put up on the screen here. And so not just the phishing capabilities that or training your organization in identifying phishing, but also taking proactive measures to protect their personal information and also your organization's information. And juice jacking is one of those ones that has cropped up over the last several years and was just a focus of an FBI PSA. If you're not familiar with what juice jacking is, I included an image here, but if you go to the airport, there's USB ports all over the place. People are charging their cell phones all the time. And I'll just bring this up here. Juice jacking is a type of cyber attack. We would consider it a cyber attack from a physical perspective, where USB ports are publicly available, but they do more than just charge your phone. Data is transmitted across those ports, and that data can be bidirectional, so they can pull your photos and information off your phone, copy portions of your phone down, but they can also push malware back to your phone as well, being bidirectional. And so those USB, I mean, I was at the airport yesterday, and there are more than ever now, especially in Denver. They just remodeled it, and so there are USB ports in the bathroom. There are USB ports at every seat and every table where you're looking, and those can be easily tampered with to include or to perform juice jacking. And that's more than just, right? More laptops these days are now charged over USB ports rather than proprietary power ports, right? The laptop I'm using uses a USB-C port to charge it. And so if I were to plug this directly into a wall to charge it, which I can do, it's my corporate laptop, and that would cause the potential for breaking the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. Some things you can do to protect against juice jacking is use your own charger, specifically, right, your wall charger, the one that plugs into an outlet that has a USB on it. You can't transfer data. I mean, for the purposes of this, you can't transfer data across electrical wires like that. That would involve a much more sophisticated attack. Plus, it would be your own USB wall adapter. They do. Whether you buy one or go to a conference and get a portable battery pack, they are out there more than ever to charge your phone or computer as well. So carry a portable battery pack. You can charge those portable battery packs in any wall jack you want because no data exists on those. There are devices called USB data blockers that are just data write blockers. So it prevents data from being written in any direction, and it would turn any USB charging port into just or any USB port that you would see anywhere into just a charging port, preventing data from transitioning across that data blocker. Those are relatively small devices and can fit on the end of a USB cable very easily. Making sure your devices are updated. This is a very, very important point as well. Updating your devices and keeping the most recent security updates on there is very necessary and a requirement in the financial services industry. And from an FTC perspective, from an FFIC perspective, and in most states, they're requiring updated software within X amount of days inside your organization. And then if you do plug in your device and there's, right, the last resort, do not unlock the device. Unlocking the device can spur that process. And most people, when they do charge their phone at public USB charging stations, they're unlocking it. And even if you don't unlock it, there is still a chance the data can be stolen. There are also, right, I would also recommend steering clear of using anybody else's cable that you don't trust. There are cables out there that exist. They're called OMG cables. The barrier of entry used to be cost, as those used to cost around $20,000. But the cables themselves may contain the malware, can be edited to wirelessly transmit data to somebody in your proximity, or push malware to your devices as well. And those cables are called OMG cables. And their price now is about $139 for the cable. So a much lower barrier of entry. And if you don't have a cable with you, make sure to get one from somebody that you do trust from that perspective. Any follow-on questions on that, Nathan?
No, I think that was great. It was a good overview. Something, again, that's just really important, and again, might not be top of mind for a lot of people, and within the mortgage industry, just like pretty much any industry these days, people are traveling, whether for work, they're traveling personally, they're often traveling with devices that are either company-owned devices or bring your own devices that they're using for work purposes. And so, plugging into a USB port without using some of the things that you suggested here can potentially put the company at risk. And so it's just a new thing to be aware of, a new thing to be training employees on, and making sure that you're talking about within your companies to just mitigate that risk. So that was a good overview. Thanks, Michael.
Absolutely perfect. One of the other things that we want to talk about, Nathan and I actually just both attended the MBA Tech Conference a couple weeks ago, and artificial intelligence was top of mind there, as it can, well, I'll just jump to the next slide. There are a lot of pros and cons within the industry. And so, right, the pros are that it can streamline just about every process inside of an organization if implemented correctly. In this case, loan origination can be easily streamlined. It enhances underwriting and risk assessment, right? The knowledge, and just the speed at which AI can react to what we need really changes how quickly anything can happen within an organization. AI also exists from a customer experience perspective, right? And so whether it's AI that is leading a customer through a process for loan origination or answering a customer's question in the event that they need help, right? AI is already there assisting our customers and our clients as needed. But one area that a lot of people don't see that is that it does improve compliance and fraud detection. With the most recent updates, I think in the last month, to large language models going from, right, in ChatGPT's case, from 1 billion data points to, or 17 billion data points to 100 trillion data points, it really can be extremely customized to assist our organizations from an efficiency perspective, but even from a compliance and fraud detection perspective, right? Artificial intelligence can identify down to just the bytes of files, little nuances that most people wouldn't pick up on, and assist in that fraud detection as well. Cons from artificial intelligence right now is that, one, it can be used maliciously, as we already talked about from a phishing and vishing perspective. There isn't a lot of regulation around that in the United States for artificial intelligence. So a lot of organizations are just using it, but don't understand what the true impacts can be. Most recently, in the last week and a half, it was identified that a large organization, Samsung, actually posted some source code, some proprietary source code into ChatGPT. And what people don't understand is that when you put information into something like an AI chatbot like ChatGPT or a large language model, that information leaves your network and goes to somebody else's servers and is stored there. And that information is used to train the artificial intelligence machine learning models, right? And so all the information that we're typing into public artificial intelligence like ChatGPT is being stored somewhere else. And so putting personal information in there can be recovered by somebody else, not as a part of your organization. There are vulnerabilities in artificial intelligence algorithms and systems. The other day, I asked ChatGPT to count the number of characters in artificial intelligence and tell me if artificial intelligence was a longer word than alternative investment. And ChatGPT was wrong. I have a screenshot of that. I should have put it in this presentation. Right, and so it's not a source of truth, and it should not be utilized as one that is 100% right and effective every time. It should be an enablement to what we're doing to help create those efficiencies, but also we need to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and making sure that it's not presenting false information. We already talked about the malicious use for fraudulent activities, and then inadequate security measures. And this is both within an organization and through the organizations hosting that artificial intelligence. We talked about penetration testing, artificial intelligence within applications, making sure that we're testing for the vulnerabilities there, making sure that we're being proactive about the security as a part of those. And then when we do integrate artificial intelligence into our loan origination process, underwriting processes, servicing processes, we want to make sure that we're creating policies on how to use that and the ethics around using things like that as well. So all great things to consider there. I don't know, question, Nathan?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say one con that you didn't put on this list, which if any of you follow what Elon Musk has to say about things, including just very recently, I think in a nationally televised interview. Maybe one more thing to add to the cons list would be AI takes over the world. So
right.
that's
we've seen it.
It's kind of a big one. Yeah.
We've seen it in Hollywood a lot, right? With movies like I, Robot, The Matrix, where humans just turn into batteries, things like that. Right. Yeah. And I think that more recently, there was an open letter from the Foundation for Life, I think is what it's called, which is chaired by Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak, who started Apple and parts of Microsoft. And they called for a moratorium on artificial intelligence development until more thoughtful regulation was put into place, because it is exponentially increasing in efficacy and development, and so making sure that there is regulation over that. And so the con would be, yes, robots taking over the world.
And Elon Musk and others have said that the issue is because for forever here on this planet, humans have been the smartest species, and that gives us a distinct advantage. But they say now that, well, that's no longer the case. We have artificial intelligence that is vastly smarter and more intelligent than any human being ever has been or ever will be, and that poses a significant risk to mankind. So we could add that to the list of cons, but maybe comic relief at this point, something of Hollywood movies, but probably not as far from the realm of possibility as some of us might want to think. So
and it's just really not leaning into like what we can do with it, and if we should do it, right? And then if we are consistently developing artificial intelligence and wanting to utilize that, let's make sure that we don't have that failure of imagination to know that it can be used negatively as well, and that we're thinking about that and trying to mitigate that as well.
Yeah. Well, we're at time here, and we didn't get to questions. Those that did submit questions, we'll respond to those after the webinar here, get back to you, with responses to those questions. But I did just want to finish with one other just shameless plug here at the end in terms of, the things that can be done and that often are required to be done by state regulatory bodies, Fannie, Freddie, others, would be things like, a pen test, having a cybersecurity assessment done regularly by a third party. Those are things that we do and have helped many clients with over the years. So, pen tests, cybersecurity assessments are important things. Just frontline, just make sure that you're identifying the gaps that exist within the organization so that you can go and remediate against those gaps or vulnerabilities. So if you have some needs there and would like to reach out and talk to us about helping with either of those, please do. But just really thank you again for taking the time out of your day and joining us. Hopefully this information was helpful, was valuable. Appreciate Michael for the time that he put into preparing to give this presentation, preparing the slides and doing the research that he did on some of the current trends and data. And again, thank you, and hope you all have a great rest of your day today. And we'll hopefully have you on another webinar soon. Take care, everybody.
Everybody.